The table was set for two, one chair on each side. A pot of green tea in the middle, still steaming. Taeho poured himself a cup, took a slow sip, and waited. Outside the observation window of Neutral Station Perrin, 40 Imperial warships sat in formation. Each one was the size of a small city. Their hulls were black and ridged like the shells of insects, and their weapon arrays glowed a dull orange, even at rest. This was what the Galactic Empire called a diplomatic escort. 40 warships to deliver a letter. Taeho set down his cup and straightened his tie. The door opened. Legate Osk entered first, his amphibian body glistening under the station lights. His skin shifted between green and gray depending on his mood, and right now it was a flat, confident teal. Behind him came 4 Imperial guards in full ceremonial armor, their faces hidden behind smooth helmets that reflected the room like dark mirrors. Looked at the single human sitting behind it. Looked at the empty chair across from him. "Where is your delegation?" Osk asked. "You are looking at it," Taeho said. He gestured at the empty chair. "Please, the tea is very good." Osk sat. He did not touch the tea. He placed a smooth black tablet on the table and slid it toward the human with one webbed hand. "The Dominion of Keth extends its hand to the species known as humanity," Osk began. His voice had the practiced smoothness of someone who had given this speech many times. "You are formally invited to join the Galactic Empire as a tributary state. In exchange for your cooperation, you will receive the full protection of the Imperial Armada, access to trade routes spanning 42 star systems, and a non-voting advisory seat in the Galactic Senate." Taeho opened the tablet. He read. Osk continued, 30% of your industrial output will be redirected to Imperial needs. Military bases will be established in your home system for your protection. Your fleet will be absorbed into the Armada's auxiliary division, and your species will be granted the honor of serving under the Imperial banner. Taeho was still reading. He had not looked up. "Ambassador," Osk said, a little louder, "do you understand what is being offered?" "I do," Taeho said. He turned to page 14. "I have a question about Article 12, subsection C. The clause about mineral rights. Does Standard Extraction Protocol refer to the Keth Revised Code, or the original Senate framework from the third expansion?" Osk blinked, both sets of eyelids. No species had ever asked about subsection C. Most species were crying by page 3. "The revised code," Osk said carefully. He reached into his jacket and pulled out a small data chip, no bigger than a thumbnail. He placed it on the table between them. "What is that?" Osk asked. "Our counter-proposal," Taeho said. The room changed temperature, not physically, but something behind Osk's eyes shifted, and his skin flickered to a color that had no name in human languages, but roughly translated to the feeling of stepping on something alive in the dark. "There is no counter-proposal," Osk said. "There has never been a counter-proposal. You accept the terms, or you face correction." Taeho leaned back in his chair. He folded his hands. He looked at Osk the way a man looks at rain through a window. Patient, certain it will pass. "Full sovereign membership," Taeho said. "Mutual non-aggression treaty. Trade agreements negotiated as equals. No bases, no tribute, no absorption." Osk laughed. It was a wet, bubbling sound, like water boiling in a closed pot. "You are a young species. You have had faster-than-light travel for what, 2 centuries? The Empire has existed for 12,000 years. We have brought 37 species into the fold. Every single one of them sat where you are sitting." He leaned forward. "Every single one of them learned." "We are not asking," Taeho said. His voice did not change. His hands did not move. "We are informing you of how this will go." Osk stared. Taeho stood. He buttoned his jacket. "The formal terms of our position will be transmitted to every Imperial channel within the hour. I suggest your emperor reads them carefully. He walked to the door, stopped, turned back. The tea really is excellent, by the way. You should have tried it. 1 hour later, every Imperial communication channel, military, diplomatic, civilian, classified, received the same transmission simultaneously. It was not a treaty. It was not a proposal. It was a single sentence, transmitted in 400 languages, formatted in plain text with no encryption, no header, and no signature. It read, "The Terran Confederacy will consider any act of aggression against its people, territory, or vessels as an irrevocable declaration of total war. And we do not lose wars." Osk delivered his report to Emperor Voleth in the throne chamber of the Dominion homeworld. The room was carved from a single piece of black stone that had taken 6 centuries to shape. Voleth sat on a throne made from the fused hulls of the first ships he had ever conquered. He was old. Old in a way that made planets look young. His scales were the gray-white of deep ocean bone, and his eyes had not blinked in 1100 years. He listened. He read the warning. He made a sound that might have been amusement. It might have been something else. With a species that old, it was hard to tell. 37 species, Voleth said. Every one of them warned us. The Rithani said they would burn the stars. The Hovan said their god would strike us down. The Sylph said they would unleash plagues that would devour worlds. He set the data tablet aside. They all knelt. He turned to High Marshal Dran, who stood at the edge of the chamber like a shadow with too many legs. "Send a corrective fleet. 200 ships. Standard intimidation protocol." Dran's mandibles clicked once. A hesitation so brief that only someone who had served with him for centuries would have noticed. "As you command," Dran said. Across the galaxy, aboard the flagship Baekdu, Fleet Admiral Yuna received Teho's coded message. 2 words on her screen. They laughed. She read it once, closed the message, opened a channel to her entire fleet. "Wake up," she said. The Baekdu hummed. Deep in its belly, something very old and very patient began to warm. 200 Imperial warships dropped out of warp at the Kirin boundary and found nothing. No defense stations, no mines, no fleet. Not even a communication buoy spinning in the dark to tell them to turn around. Just empty space, cold and wide, and impossibly quiet. High Marshal Dran stood on the command bridge of the Eternal Doctrine and stared at the sensor display. His compound eyes processed information faster than any human brain could manage, and right now, every single one of his visual receptors was telling him the same thing. There was nothing here. "Scan again," he ordered. His officers scanned again, and once more after that. The Kirin boundary, the official edge of human-claimed space, was completely undefended. No energy signatures, no gravitational anomalies, no hidden ships running silent behind asteroids, nothing. One of his junior officers, a young insectoid with fresh chitin, turned from her station. "High Marshal, should we transmit the standard warning?" Dran's mandibles clicked. "Yes, standard protocol." He nodded. The transmission went out on all frequencies. "You have been found in violation of Imperial will. Power down your defenses and prepare for inspection." Silence. They waited 1 hour, then 2, then 6. The fleet sat at the boundary, like 200 wolves, standing at the edge of a forest that had no rabbits, and no smell, and no sound. Dran had conquered 14 species in his career. He had seen fear take many shapes. Desperate charges, panicked retreats, surrender beacons fired before the first shot. He had never seen this. He had never seen nothing. "Send probes," Dran said. 20 long-range probes launched from the fleet and crossed into human space. They transmitted data. Standard readings, atmospheric compositions, background radiation levels. Normal. The kind of data that made junior officers fall asleep at their stations. 11 minutes in, the first probe went dark. Not destroyed. Drawn checked the telemetry 3 times to be certain. The probe was not hit. Its signal did not scatter or fragment the way it would under weapons fire. It simply stopped, as if someone had reached across the void and pressed an off switch. The second probe went dark, then the third, then all of them, one after another, like candles being pinched out by a very careful hand. Drawn stood perfectly still. His officers watched him. In 12 centuries of imperial military history, no species had ever reached into imperial hardware and turned it off. Imperial encryption was considered unbreakable. It was built on mathematical principles that predated most civilizations. Someone had just broken it the way a child breaks a toy. Casually, without effort, almost as an afterthought. Deep inside human space, aboard the Baekdu, Chief Engineer Jihai leaned back in her chair and cracked her knuckles. Around her, the engineering bay hummed with screens and cables, and the low vibration of a reactor running at 12% capacity. She had cracked the Imperial encryption in under 3 hours. The cipher keys had been provided 6 months ago by Sumi's intelligence network. The actual cracking was just math. Jihai liked math. She opened a channel to Admiral Yuna. "Probes are down. Want me to send them a message?" "One message," Yuna said. "Keep it short." Jihai grinned. She reactivated the dead probes, all 20 of them, just long enough to deliver a single transmission. On the Eternal Doctrine, every screen on the bridge flickered. Drawn's officers scrambled. Emergency protocols activated, weapons charged. Then the screen settled, and on every display, on every console, on every personal device carried by every soldier in the fleet, a video played. A woman sat in a chair, in a plain room. No uniform markings visible, no technology visible, no windows. Just a woman and a chair, and a wall behind her that could have been anywhere. Fleet Admiral Yuna looked into the camera, with eyes that carried the particular stillness of a person who had already done all her grieving years ago, and now had only the quiet clarity that comes after. "You are in our living room," she said. "Leave, or we will show you why the door was open." The video ended. Drawn watched it twice, then a third time. He studied her face, her posture, the way she sat in that chair, like it was the only piece of furniture in the universe, and she had chosen it. He was 1,200 years old. He had seen bluffs. He had seen threats delivered by trembling hands and cracking voices. He had seen species puff themselves up, like dying animals trying to look large. This was not a bluff. He knew it the way a predator knows another predator. Something in the way she did not move. Something in the way the room had no technology visible. Not because there was none, but because she did not need the human watching this to see it. The absence was the message. But Drawn was a soldier, and soldiers follow orders. "Scout squadron forward," he commanded. 15 ships. Cross the boundary. Report back." The 15 ships crossed into human space. They flew for 40 minutes and found a single vessel. It was small, barely bigger than a cargo shuttle. It sat in open space, with its running lights on, like a porch light left burning. The squadron commander laughed. He opened fire. Every shot missed. Not because the shuttle moved. It sat perfectly still. The shots missed because the targeting systems on all 15 Imperial warships adjusted themselves, mid-firing sequence, to aim at each other. Alarms screamed across 15 bridges simultaneously. Weapons that were locked on a cargo shuttle were now locked on Allied ships. The squadron broke formation in panic. 2 ships collided. One fired a volley that ripped through its neighbor's engine block. The cargo shuttle sat in the middle of the chaos like a stone in a river, untouched, unmoving, running lights still on. Dron watched the telemetry feed from the Eternal Doctrine. He watched 15 of his ships tear themselves apart around a vessel that had not fired a single shot. His mandibles clicked. Once, twice. "Recall the squadron," he said. "All ships, reverse course. We are pulling back to the boundary." His officers obeyed. They were happy to obey. That night, or what passed for night on a warship that never saw a sun, Dron sat in his quarters and composed his report to Emperor Voleth. He wrote it in the old language, the formal tongue reserved for matters of civilizational weight. He chose each word with the care of a surgeon. The report was 3 pages long. Most of it was tactical data, sensor readings, telemetry logs, damage assessments. But in the final paragraph, Dron wrote a sentence he had never written before in 6 centuries of service. "I recommend further assessment before engagement. This species does not behave like prey." Voleth read the report in his throne room. He read the final sentence twice. Then he summoned his war council and ordered the largest fleet mobilization in Imperial history. 2,000 warships, the full strength of the Armada. Every dreadnought, every carrier, every destroyer that could be pulled from patrol duty across 40 star systems. "If they wish to be treated as something other than prey," Voleth said, "then we will hunt them as equals." Dron received the orders. He read them standing at the viewport of the Eternal Doctrine, looking out at the dark boundary where human space began and Imperial certainty ended. His mandibles clicked once. He said nothing. 2,000 warships entered the Heian corridor in a formation that stretched across 3 light minutes of space. From above, if anything could have been above, the Imperial Armada looked like a black river pouring through a canyon of purple nebula. Each ship a dark scale on the body of something enormous and old, and very sure of itself. High Marshal Dron commanded from the center of the formation. He had arranged the fleet in the doctrine of overwhelming presence, a formation designed not just to win a battle, but to make the enemy understand in their bones, in whatever passed for their souls, that fighting was not an option. It had worked 37 times before. The Terran fleet appeared at the far end of the corridor. 400 ships. Dron's sensor officers counted them 3 times. 400. The Empire outnumbered them 5-1. Some of the human ships were large and modern, their hulls smooth and angular, like folded paper. Others looked old, patched. One of them, a heavy cruiser near the center of the formation, was trailing bright sparks from its port side, like a wounded animal dragging a broken leg. That was the Bektu. The sparks were Jihei running the new weapons array through its final calibration cycle. She liked to push systems to their limit before a fight. "If it does not break now," she always said, "it will not break when it matters." On the bridge of the Bektu, Fleet Admiral Yuna stood with her hands clasped behind her back and watched 2,000 enemy warships fill her tactical display. Each red dot was a vessel carrying enough firepower to burn a continent. She counted them the way a carpenter counts nails, tools, resources, things that would be used and spent. "All ships, hold position," Yuna said. "Let them come to us." The Imperial Armada advanced. The distance closed. 1 light minute, half a light minute. Weapons range. Dron gave the order. The first Imperial volley was textbook. 2,000 ships fired simultaneously. A wall of plasma and kinetic rounds and directed energy that turned the space between the fleets into a bright, screaming wound. It was the kind of volley that ended civilizations, the kind that left nothing behind but hot gas and regret. It hit the Terran fleet. Every shield held. Dron leaned forward. His compound eyes tracked the energy readings. The Terran shields were not absorbing the volley. They were not deflecting it. They were doing something his tactical computers did not have a word for. The energy was being captured, pulled into the shield matrix, cycled through systems he could not identify, and fed somewhere deeper inside the human ships. somewhere hungry. Fire again, Drawn ordered. The second volley hit. Same result. Every megajoule of Imperial aggression was being swallowed whole and digested by a technology that should not have existed. On the Baekdu, Jihei watched her power readings climb. The weapons array was drinking energy from the shields like water from a hose. It was the system she had spent 9 years designing. The principle was simple, almost embarrassingly so. Humans had always been good at one thing above all others: taking what was thrown at them and throwing it back harder. Array at 60%, Jihei reported. 70, 80, hold, Yuna said. The Empire fired a third volley, heavier this time. Drawn had ordered the dreadnoughts to use their primary batteries, weapons designed to crack planets. The shields held. The array hit 94%. Admiral, Jihei said, we are full. Yuna opened a fleet-wide channel. Every Terran ship heard her voice. It was the calmest thing in the universe at that moment. Return what they gave us. 400 Terran ships fired one volley. 1. The energy was not theirs. It was the Empire's own fire, captured and compressed and shaped into something new. Something the original weapons had never been designed to produce. It crossed the space between the fleets in less than a heartbeat. 300 Imperial ships stopped existing. Not exploded, not destroyed. There was no fire, no debris, no expanding cloud of gas and metal. The ships simply were not there anymore. The molecules that had made up their hulls, their engines, their crews, their histories, all of it came apart at a level so fundamental that there was nothing left to float in the vacuum. 300 points of red light vanished from Dran's tactical display like someone had wiped a window clean. The bridge of the Eternal Doctrine went silent. The kind of silence that has weight. Yuna opened a channel, not to her fleet this time, to the Empire. Every Imperial ship heard her voice. That was a warning shot, she said. The next one is not. You have 4 minutes to reverse course. 4 minutes. Drawn understood the number. It was not round. It was not a negotiation. It was the exact time his fleet's retreat sequence required, calculated down to the second, with a precision that meant the humans had already modeled every possible movement of every ship in his fleet before the battle began. They had known everything: the formation, the volley pattern, the shield frequency. They had known, and they had sat there and let the Empire pour its fury into them, and they had used it. Drawn made his decision in 2 seconds. All ships, reverse course, full retreat, execute immediately. The order went out. 1,700 ships began to turn. 200 captains, loyalists, true believers, officers who had pledged personal oaths to Emperor Voleth, refused. Their orders came from the Emperor, not from Dran. The Emperor had said advance, and they would advance. Dran watched them push forward on his display. 200 red dots moving toward 400 blue ones. He felt something he had not felt in 600 years of service. Not fear. Something worse. Pity. The 200 loyalist ships drove deep into the corridor, past the Terran fleet, heading for the colony worlds beyond. They carried landing forces, shock troops, 90,000 Imperial soldiers bred and trained for ground warfare. On colony world Mujin 7, Commander Dowan of the Terran 9th Division received the alert. He was sitting in a folding chair outside his command tent, eating rice from a metal bowl with chopsticks. The alert chimed on his wrist display. He read it. 200 enemy warships inbound. 90,000 ground troops. His division had 8,000 soldiers. Dowan set down his bowl. He stood up. He looked at the sky, which was still blue, still normal, still the kind of sky that children drew with crayons. He opened a channel to his division. They brought an army, he said. Poor bastards. They're going to need a bigger one. He picked up his bowl and finished his rice. The sky above Mujin 7 was about to change color. Back on the Eternal Doctrine, Drawn completed his retreat. For the first time in 6 centuries of imperial service, he had disobeyed a direct order from the Emperor. He sat alone in his quarters and stared at his tactical log. The gap where 300 ships used to be stared back at him. His communicator chimed. A direct channel from the Imperial throne world. Emperor Voleth, demanding an explanation. Drawn turned off the communicator. He sat in the dark and listened to the hum of his ship, and for the first time in his very long life, he wondered if the empire he served was worth the cost of its own survival. The Imperial landing craft came down through the atmosphere of Mujin 7 like metal rain. Hundreds of them, black and angular, burning orange trails across a sky that had been blue 10 minutes ago and was now the color of a bruise. 90,000 soldiers, heavily armored, bred for war in gene labs that had been perfecting combat biology for 8,000 years. Commander Darwin watched them land from a ridge overlooking the colony's main settlement. The settlement was a mining town. 40,000 people, families, children, engineers who pulled rare minerals from the ground and shipped them to Earth. They had been offered evacuation 3 weeks ago. Most of them had said no. This was their home. They had built it with their own hands. They were not leaving. Darwin had not argued. He had asked once. That was enough. He turned to his second-in-command, a woman named Bora with short hair and a scar across her jaw that she had gotten not from combat, but from a farming accident on her family's land back on Earth. Get the civilians into the mine shafts, deep as they can go. Tell them to bring water. She answered, They are already moving. They started packing the moment they saw the sky change. Darwin nodded. Good people, tough people. The kind who read a burning sky and packed water instead of running. 8,000 Terran soldiers against 90,000 Imperial troops. The math was simple, and the math was bad. But math had never been the whole story, not with the 9th. The Imperial force advanced on the settlement in standard siege formation, wide, overwhelming, designed to encircle and suffocate. Their commander was efficient and experienced. He had crushed rebellions on 6 worlds. He expected this to take 12 hours. It did not take 12 hours. Down did not fight the siege. He fought the terrain. Mujin 7 was a mining colony, and mining colonies were built on top of tunnels. Hundreds of kilometers of tunnels, drilled over decades, mapped by engineers who knew every meter of rock like they knew the bones of their own hands. Down soldiers moved through the tunnels like blood through veins. They appeared behind Imperial lines, struck and vanished before the enemy could turn around. They collapsed tunnel entrances onto advancing columns. They flooded sections with coolant from the mining equipment. They turned the ground itself into a weapon. The Imperial troops were stronger, better armored, better armed. But they were fighting the planet, and the planet belonged to the humans who had built their lives inside it. The battle lasted 3 days. On the second day, an Imperial column pushed through the eastern ridge and reached the entrance to Mine Shaft 7, where 2,000 civilians were sheltering underground. A single Terran medic named Kyung held the entrance for 9 hours. He had a broken rifle that jammed every 4th shot, and a welding torch he had taken from a maintenance closet. When they found him the next morning, he was still standing in the doorway. The Imperial column had pulled back. Kyung had 17 wounds. None of them were in his back. On the 3rd day, Darwin's engineers collapsed a main tunnel onto an Imperial column of 400 soldiers. The ground swallowed them. It would have been easy to leave them there. Buried, forgotten, one less problem. Darwin ordered his soldiers to dig them out. They pulled 312 Imperial soldiers from the rubble. Alive. Broken, bleeding, terrified, but alive. Darwin's medics treated their wounds alongside Terran wounded. Same supplies, same care, same hands. One of the rescued Imperial soldiers, a young one, barely out of whatever training program had made him, looked up at the human medic bandaging his arm, and made a sound that his species used for confusion. "Why?" he asked. The medic, a woman named Unji, did not look up from her work. "Because we are not you," she said. Then quieter, "And because someone has to be better." Darwin heard about the exchange later. He said nothing. There was nothing to say. It was simply the truth. While Mugen 7 burned, 12,000 light-years away, Intelligence Director Sumi sat in a room that officially did not exist, in a building that appeared on no map, and activated a network she had spent 20 years building. She had never fired a weapon. She was small, quiet, and had the kind of face that people forgot 5 minutes after meeting her. This was, of course, by design. The most dangerous woman in the galaxy looked like someone's aunt. The network reached into every corner of the Empire, not through hacking, not through technology, through people. Sumi had spent 2 decades placing agents, building relationships, earning trust. She knew the names of dissidents on 12 worlds. She knew which Imperial governors were corrupt. She knew which tributary species were waiting, had been waiting for centuries, for someone to crack the door open. She cracked the door open. Every tributary species in the Empire received the same data package simultaneously. Complete Imperial military deployments, supply chain maps, communication codes, patrol schedules. Weakness after weakness after weakness, laid out like a blueprint for the cage they had been living in. And attached to the data, a single message: they are distracted. If you have been waiting for a moment, this is it. Within 48 hours, 3 tributary species revolted. The Rathani seized their orbital stations. The Hovan destroyed the Imperial garrison on their homeworld. The Sylph, the quietest, most obedient tributary in Imperial history, simply stopped. Stopped mining, stopped manufacturing, stopped answering communications. An entire civilization went silent overnight, and the silence was louder than any weapon. The Empire, which had been fighting 1 war against 1 species, was now fighting 4 wars on 4 fronts. Its supply lines stretched, its fleets scattered. Its certainty, the bedrock certainty of 12,000 years, began to crack like ice in spring. On the Imperial throne world, Emperor Volith received the reports one after another. Mugen 7 was not falling. The tributaries were rebelling. Dron was not answering his communications. The humans had not broken, had not surrendered, had not begged. For the first time in 12 centuries, Volith felt something he did not recognize. His species had no word for it. The closest translation was the feeling of reaching for something that had always been there and finding empty air. Humans called it doubt. Ambassador Tejo made the broadcast that evening. Not to the Emperor, not to the military, to the people of the Empire. Every species, every world, every citizen who had ever lived under Imperial rule. He stood in front of a camera, no uniform, no backdrop, no symbols of power, and read a list. The names of every species the Empire had conquered. All 37 of them. He pronounced each name carefully, correctly, in their own language. Some of the names had not been spoken aloud by anyone outside their homeworld in centuries. It took 11 minutes. When he finished, he looked into the camera and said, "We are number 38. We are the last name that will ever be added to this list, not because we are the strongest species in this galaxy, but because after us, there will be no list." The broadcast ended. On Mugen 7, the battle was over. The Imperial force had retreated. Darwin walked the field afterward, in the gray light of a dawn that smelled like burned metal and wet earth. Bora walked beside him, holding a datapad with the casualty report. 2,041 Terran soldiers dead. Darwin read every name. He did not skim, he did not skip. He read each one the way you read something holy. Something that cost more than you can measure and must never be forgotten. Khan was on the list. The medic who held the door for 9 hours. Unji was not. The medic who bandaged the enemy would live to bandage more. Darwin closed the datapad. He looked at the sky. It was blue again. Somehow, despite everything, it was blue. He sat down on the same ridge where he had watched the invasion begin, and he was quiet for a long time. The Empire was coming apart, and it was doing it quietly. There were no great explosions, no dramatic last stands at the gates of the throne world. The thing that had held the galaxy together for 12,000 years was simply loosening, the way a knot loosens when you stop pulling both ends. 5 tributary species had now revolted. 8 more had stopped paying tribute and gone silent, waiting to see which way the wind blew. Imperial governors on the outer worlds were making private deals with their local populations, trading obedience for survival. The armada was scattered across 4 fronts, and bleeding ships faster than it could replace them. High Marshal Dran had taken 600 warships, a third of the remaining fleet, and parked them in a dead stretch of space between 2 burned-out stars. He answered no communications. He attacked no one. 600 ships, hanging in the dark like a held breath. Intelligence Director Sumi made her final move. It was not a weapon. It was not a hack. It was not even a secret. She released everything. Every classified Imperial document, every suppressed report, every order to burn a city, starve a population, erase a language. 12,000 years of empire, written in the Empire's own hand, transmitted to every species in the galaxy simultaneously. No commentary, no framing, no human voice telling anyone what to think. Just data. Just the truth in the Empire's own words about what empire actually cost. Sumi did not watch the transmission go out. She poured herself a cup of tea, sat in her unmarked office, and opened a novel she had been meaning to finish for 3 years. Her work was done. The truth would do the rest. On the Imperial throne world, the data arrived like a flood. Citizens who had lived their entire lives believing the Empire was a force for order and civilization read their own government's internal communications and learned what order looked like from underneath. The reports were dry, technical, the language of bureaucracy. That made them worse. Atrocities described in the same tone as budget allocations. Entire species reduced to line items in a spreadsheet. The throne world did not revolt. It did something more devastating. It went quiet. Dran broke his silence 3 days later. He opened a private channel to the Baekdu. Encrypted. Personal. When Fleet Admiral Yuna answered, she saw an old insectoid soldier sitting alone in a dim room, his compound eyes reflecting light from a single screen. "What do you want?" Dran asked. A fair question. The question every conquered species dreads and every conqueror expects. What do you want from us? How much will this cost? What is the shape of our surrender? I want you to choose, Yuna said. Dran waited for the rest, the demands, the territory maps, the lists of reparations, the humiliation rituals that victors always required, because victory without humiliation was never enough for any species he had ever known. Yuna offered none of it. We do not need you to kneel, she said. We need you to decide. Not because you are afraid, not because you are ordered to, because you looked at what you have been part of, and you chose something else. Dran was quiet for a long time. The silence between them stretched across light years, across species, across every assumption he had built his life on. He had served the Empire for 6 centuries. He had believed in it. Not blindly. He was too old and too intelligent for blind faith. He had believed in it the way you believe in gravity, It was simply there, the way the galaxy worked. And now a human woman was sitting in a chair, on a warship held together with spit and engineering genius, telling him that gravity was a choice. He opened his fleet's communication channels to the tributary species. All of them. It was the largest act of military defiance in galactic history. And it happened without a single shot fired. 600 Imperial warships, commanded by the greatest military mind the Empire had ever produced, simply opened their doors. Yuna took one ship to the edge of the Emperor's defensive perimeter. One ship, no weapons, no escort. The Bekdu stayed behind. Jihei argued. Taeho argued. Doan, when he heard, said something so profane that the communication officer deleted it from the official record. Yuna went anyway. One ship, one woman. Emperor Voleth granted her an audience. Perhaps out of curiosity. Perhaps out of contempt. Perhaps because, after 12 centuries, something new was the only thing left that interested him. They spoke through a comlink. Yuna in her small ship. Voleth on his throne of fused hulls. She could see him on her screen, ancient, gray-white, still as stone. His eyes had not blinked in 1100 years. She did not threaten him. She did not list humanity's victories. She did not mention the 300 ships that had ceased to exist, or the tributaries that had broken free, or the data that had torn his empire's reputation apart. He knew all of that. Repeating it would have been small. Instead, she told him about a colony, a small one, a mining settlement on a world with no name worth remembering. She told him about a girl who watched the sky turn the wrong color, about ground so hot that shoes melted to it, about a mother's voice on a communicator that stopped mid-word and never came back. She told him this not for sympathy. She told him so that he would understand what she said next. I know what empire costs, Yuna said. I have been paying for it my whole life. We built everything we built, every weapon, every shield, every ship, so that nobody pays that price again. Not our people, not yours, not anyone's. Voleth listened. His ancient eyes, which had watched civilizations rise and kneel and crumble for 1200 years, watched a human woman describe the burning of her childhood in a voice that did not shake. Ambassador Taeho transmitted the formal terms 1 hour later. They were not surrender demands. They were not a treaty. They were a charter. The Compact of Equals. 42 pages. Every species in the galaxy received a copy. Sovereign membership for all. No tributaries, no subjects, no tribute. Voluntary cooperation. Mutual defense. One species, one vote. One species, one veto. The document was detailed and fair, and absolute in its refusal to give any single civilization power over another. Taeho had spent 3 years writing it. He had consulted linguists from 11 species to make sure the translation carried not just the words, but the weight behind them. Voleth read the compact in his throne room, the room that had taken 6 centuries to carve from a single stone, the throne made from the hulls of conquered ships. 12,000 years of certainty pressed against his back. He set the document down. He looked at his hands. Gray-white, scaled, old in a way that planets could not match. These hands had signed orders that moved fleets, toppled governments, erased languages. These hands had built an empire so vast that light itself grew tired crossing it. He did not sign the compact. He set down his imperial seal, the small black disk that carried the authority of the Dominion of Keth, pressed into hot metal on every order he had ever given, and he placed it on the arm of his throne. Then he stood, and he walked out of his own throne room, past his guards, past his advisors, past the 12th-century weight of everything he had been. It was not surrender. It was not defeat. It was something the galaxy had never seen an emperor do. He simply stopped. 1 year later, the Compact of Equals had 23 signatories. The former empire was in chaos, not the violent kind, but the messy, noisy, difficult kind that comes when people who have never been free try to remember how. Some worlds thrived. All of them were choosing, and choosing was hard, and hard was better than obedient. Drawn served as military advisor to the Compact, building a defense force that answered to no single species. He was good at it. Protecting things, it turned out, suited him better than conquering them. Sumi officially retired. Nobody in the intelligence community believed it. They were right not to. Taiho chaired the first full session of the new Galactic Senate. 23 species, arguing and debating and disagreeing and voting. It was loud and slow and frustrating and alive. He poured his own tea. He still smiled too much. Jiho went back to her engineering bay and started building something new. She would not tell anyone what it was. When asked, she patted the reactor housing of the Baekdu and said, "This one is not a weapon." Then she paused. Probably. White stone, standing on the ridge where Darwin had watched the invasion begin. Darwin visited once a year. He read the names, all 2,041 of them. It took a long time. It was supposed to. And at the center of the memorial, carved in stone in 40 languages, including 12 that the Empire had once tried to erase, was the warning. The single sentence that had started everything. The Terran Confederacy will consider any act of aggression against its people, territory, or vessels as an irrevocable declaration of total war, and we do not lose wars. Below it, in smaller letters, was the line that Yuna had insisted on adding, the line that turned a threat into a promise, the line that made the whole thing human. But we would rather not.